Hello and welcome to part 2 of This Arm is for Lancaster, following very swiftly on the first video because, well, there's no time like the present, and what with the storm raging outside, I'm cooped up inside like many other people, so I may as well just crack on. So we left my subject, John de Vere, Earl of Oxford, in 1469. He'd just been released from the Tower of London and had entered into a fresh conspiracy with his new allies, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick, and George, Duke of Clarence. And these three aimed to topple the Yorkist king, Edward IV. And now what follows is quite complicated. It's very seldom straightforward in this era, the Wars of the Roses. Instead of attacking Edward directly, what they do is they use a go-between. Now, this man's name is given as Robin of Redesdale, and he's the leader of a band of rebels in Yorkshire. His real name was probably Sir John Conyers, although there are other candidates, but Conyers is the most likely. And he was one of Warwick's knights. And what's happening is that under the guise of this local revolt in Yorkshire, Warwick, Clarence and Oxford are secretly trying to attack the king and defeat him in war, whilst avoiding coming out openly against him. And Edward marches north quite slowly, really, which is not like him. He's usually very quick to face a challenge, to crush this revolt. But then he discovers that Warwick, Clarence and Oxford have returned from Calais, where they'd taken refuge in France, and landed on the south coast behind him. So he's now caught between two fires, two armies advancing at once against him from two directions, north and south. So his response is to summon his friends, William Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke, very powerful man in Wales, called Black William, Gwilym Ddu by the Welsh, and his other favourite, the Earl of Devon. And the idea is that they'll rush up and help him to destroy the Northerners, and then they can turn around and deal with Warwick and his allies. Unfortunately for Edward, Robin of Redesdale moves too quickly for him. Whilst at the same time, Pembroke and Devon have this ridiculous argument in a pub, if you can believe it, over which of them is going to sleep with this girl in the bar. And they actually have a fight over it. They have a pub brawl, at the end of which Devon takes offence and he tells Pembroke to go to hell, and he takes his men and he leaves in a sulk. He goes off in a huff and leaves Pembroke and his men to face the Northerners by themselves. So when the battle is fought at Edgecote near Banbury, Robin of Redesdale only has to fight Pembroke. Even so, the battle is very, very close, and Pembroke looks to be winning until some of Warwick's reinforcements suddenly turn up in their rear. This spreads panic throughout the Yorkist army. They flee, and they're butchered in their thousands. Usually in this era, this is when the real killing starts, when one army breaks and turns its back. And about 2,000 Welsh gentry are slaughtered in the rout, which is a huge disaster for Wales and lamented by Welsh poets for generations afterwards. So it's a disaster both for Edward IV and for the people of Wales. I've got a cup of tea here, so excuse me if I take occasional sips from it. In the aftermath, Warwick and his allies, including Oxford, are able to take control of Edward IV, who no longer has an effective army and has to do whatever they tell him. But this is far from satisfactory, because what they really need to do is kill him or put him in prison until he dies. But they won't take that final step because it takes balls to do that, and it won't look good. And their argument is they're trying to get rid of Edward's evil counsellors, particularly the Woodvilles, who are his in-laws, the extended family of his unpopular queen, Elizabeth Woodville. And to attack the king himself is something entirely different. It's a big problem. And what Edward is able to do is slowly claw back his power. So by the time he arrives in London, he's actually back on top again. He's not fought a battle or anything. He's just been able to turn the tables on Warwick and his allies, simply because he is the king, and it's too big of a step to eliminate him, to remove him. So This is a very uncomfortable situation. It only lasts a few months. The two factions are still very much at loggerheads. And Warwick's solution is to try and repeat the strategy again. He raises yet another revolt, this time in Lincolnshire. And again, the idea is to use someone else to fight Edward for him. In this case, it's the Wells family, who are an important baronial family in Lincolnshire. Unfortunately for him, it doesn't work this time. Edward raises an army and personally leads it into Lincolnshire to confront this new army of rebels. And a battle of sorts is fought at a place called Losecoat Field. And it's called that because the rebels run away so quickly after just a single round of cannon fire from Edward's army. And they allegedly tore off their livery jackets, their coats, and threw them down as they ran. It's not really a battle. One side just turns and runs before anything happens. And so now Edward really is on top, and his enemies, Warwick, Clarence and Oxford, are in a very bad position because now they haven't even got the military advantage. And their only option is to run for it, to flee, which is what they do. All three of them, probably at slightly different times, but they all flee England. They hop over the Channel and they go to Angers in the Loire Valley, where Margaret of Anjou is waiting. Now, who is she? Margaret of Anjou was the queen of Henry VI, the head of the House of Lancaster. Now, by this point, Henry had been deposed and he was still alive, but he was held prisoner in the Tower of London. And Margaret, for a time, had tried to carry on the war on behalf of her husband, but had been defeated and forced to flee to France. And she set up this court in exile at Angers, with the support of her cousin, King Louis, the King of France, called the Spider King because he was so crafty. And all of the surviving Lancastrians who want to carry on the fight, they flock to Margaret's court because this is their only sort of safe house, their only real place of refuge. And now this is where Warwick, Clarence and Oxford end up. In the case of Warwick and Clarence, it's their last resort. They don't really have anywhere else to go. And they certainly wouldn't have teamed up with Margaret if they had any other option, because they all hated each other. Warwick and Clarence had both initially supported King Edward and helped him to depose her husband, Henry VI. And there's a lot of lingering bitterness and resentment over that, and all the battles that have been fought and all the bloodshed. Oxford's attitude is slightly different, and he gets a much warmer welcome when he arrives in Angers. Supposedly, when Warwick arrived, Margaret showed her distrust of him by making him kneel in front of her and stay there for about an hour. She just leaves him there, and you can imagine he gets very sore knees, and this is quite a humiliating ritual. But she eventually sort of relents and lets him get up, but she means to show that, you know, she's not happy about this. She doesn't really want to be friends with him, or vice versa. They just don't have any choice. It's an alliance of convenience. Oxford is different. He's always been a staunch Lancastrian, even if he pretended to be loyal to Edward for a time. And he's suffered a great deal for the Lancastrian cause. As I explained in my previous video, his father and elder brother had been executed. And Margaret appreciates this, and she greets him much more warmly. And so now you have this sort of powerful new alliance in France. Margaret, with Warwick, Clarence and Oxford on her side, and the backing of her kinsman, the King of France, who is prepared to give them men and money and ships. The reason Louis is getting involved is because his rival, the Duke of Burgundy, Charles the Bold, is friends with Edward IV. And what Louis wants is to sponsor an invasion of England, both to keep the English occupied so they won't invade France. That's a constant sort of strategy. But also so if he can destroy Edward IV, or help Margaret and her allies to do that, then that will detach England from the Burgundian alliance, and he will be able to attack the Duke of Burgundy, who will now be isolated. So there's all these sort of politics going on, and wheels within wheels. And so in this, we are in early 1471 now, I think. The Allies are poised to land launch another invasion of England, and this time properly deal with Edward and destroy him completely. And so that is what we will deal with in the next video. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Please feel free to leave any comments below, by the way, or queries. Thanks again.